The morning sun cast long shadows across the cemetery hill outside Cedar Falls, Colorado, but Nathaniel Hutchinson didn't notice the beauty of the light. He stood beside a hole in the ground that seemed too small to contain the enormity of his loss, his rough hands gripping the pine box he'd built himself through the night. Inside lay his daughter Emma, just 9 years old, taken by the scarlet fever that had swept through the valley like wildfire. The preacher's words floated past him like smoke. Dust to dust. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Empty phrases that meant nothing when weighed against the silence where his daughter's laughter used to be. Nathaniel's wife Margaret stood beside him, her face carved from stone, tears long since dried up. Their 2 surviving children, Thomas and little Sarah, clung to her skirts, too young to fully understand that their sister wasn't coming back. It should have been a private burial. Nathaniel had made that clear to Reverend Morrison when he'd ridden to town yesterday, half mad with grief and exhaustion. Family only. He didn't want the hollow sympathy of neighbors who'd kept their distance during the outbreak, afraid the sickness might spread to their own homes. He didn't want their casseroles and condolences now, when it was too late. But as the Reverend spoke his final prayer, Nathaniel became aware of movement on the road leading up to the cemetery. A line of riders was approaching, moving slowly and deliberately. Not neighbors. He knew every horse and rider in the valley. These were strangers, 10 of them, dressed in the worn clothing of working men. They dismounted at a respectful distance and stood quietly, hats in their hands. "Who the hell are they?" Nathaniel muttered to Margaret. She shook her head, as bewildered as he was. The Reverend had noticed too, pausing in his prayer to squint at the newcomers. But the strangers made no move to interrupt, simply stood there like they were waiting for something. "Let's finish this," Nathaniel said roughly. He couldn't deal with strangers right now. He just wanted to bury his daughter and retreat to his ranch to grieve in peace. They lowered the small coffin into the ground. Each shovelful of dirt that Nathaniel threw felt like it was burying a piece of his own heart. Emma had been special, not just because she was his daughter, but because she'd had a light in her that drew people like moths to a flame. She could gentle the wildest horse with a touch, could make even the sourest ranch hand smile with her stories. The ranch felt hollow without her, like a body without a soul. When the grave was filled and the small wooden cross placed at its head, the strangers finally moved. They approached slowly, the lead man, a weathered fellow in his 50s with kind eyes, stepping forward. "Mr. Hutchinson," he asked, his voice carrying a slight German accent. "My name is Friedrich Bauder. These are my companions. We've come to pay our respects." "I don't know you," Nathaniel said flatly. "This is a private burial." "Yes, sir, I understand," Friedrich said. "But you see, we knew Emma." "In a way." Nathaniel's grief crystallized into anger. "You didn't know my daughter. I've never seen any of you before in my life." "Perhaps I should explain," Friedrich said gently. 3 months ago, my nephew Klaus was traveling through your valley. His wagon broke an axle near your property. He was alone, spoke little English, had no tools to fix it. Your daughter found him." The anger in Nathaniel's chest wavered. He remembered that day. Emma had come running to the house, breathless with excitement about finding a lost man by the creek. Nathaniel had been busy with branding, and had sent her back with some tools and food, thinking little of it. "Emma didn't just bring supplies," Friedrich continued. "She stayed with Klaus for hours, helped him fix the wagon, though she was just a small girl. She shared her lunch with him, taught him English words, even gave him her lucky penny for his journey. When Klaus finally made it to Denver, where I live, he couldn't stop talking about the angel child who'd saved him." One of the other men stepped forward. He was younger, Mexican by his features. "My name is Carlos Mendoza. 2 years ago, my family was passing through. My youngest son fell from our wagon, broke his leg bad. We had no money for a doctor. Your Emma, she saw us on the road. She ran home and came back with her father. With you, senor. You set my boy's leg, wouldn't take payment. But it was Emma who sat with him, told him stories to keep his mind off the pain. She gave him her doll to hold, said he needed it more." Nathaniel remembered that too, though hazily. There had been so many such incidents over the years. Emma couldn't pass suffering without trying to help. It had worried him sometimes, how freely she gave of herself. A third man spoke up, older, with the bearing of a former soldier. James McKay, sir. Last winter I was caught in that blizzard that hit unexpected. Was near frozen to death when I saw your barn light. Your girl, she was doing evening chores. That little thing got me inside, got me warm, probably saved my life. Wouldn't even let me thank her proper. Just said that's what people do. They help each other. One by one, the others came forward with their stories. Emma had given a traveling preacher's family vegetables from her garden when they had nothing. She'd climbed a tree to rescue a stranger's cat. She'd shared her birthday cake with a group of Chinese railroad workers who'd been run off from town without supplies. Each story was small in itself, but together they painted a picture of a child who'd scattered kindness like seeds wherever she went. When word reached us about the fever, about Emma, Friedrich's voice broke slightly. We knew we had to come, to pay our respects, to tell you that your daughter's life mattered to more people than you might know. Margaret was crying now, the stone facade cracking. Sarah and Thomas looked up at the strangers with wonder, hearing stories about their sister they'd never known. But Nathaniel felt something else, a burning in his chest that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite anger. "Why didn't you come when she was sick?" he asked harshly. "Where were all of you when she needed help?" The men looked down, shame on their faces. "We didn't know," Carlos said quietly. "We only heard after she was gone." "We would have come, senor. We would have done anything." "Anything," Nathaniel repeated bitterly. "But you're too late. She's gone. Your stories don't bring her back." Friedrich reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "No, they don't. But perhaps her kindness doesn't have to die with her." He opened the pouch, revealing a collection of coins, silver dollars, gold pieces, even some paper currency. "We took up a collection. Everyone Emma helped, and others who heard the stories. There's nearly $300 here." Nathaniel stared at the money. It was more cash than he'd seen in one place in years. "I don't want your money." "It's not for you," Friedrich said gently. "It's for Emma's work. You have other children. There are other families in the valley with children. The fever took many. This money, we thought it could help. Maybe start a school. Maybe bring a real doctor to town. Something to carry on what Emma started." "What she started?" Nathaniel's voice was rough. "She was 9 years old. She didn't start anything. She was just a child who didn't know better than to trust strangers." "No," said a new voice. It was the youngest of the group, barely more than a boy himself. "She knew exactly what she was doing. I'm William Foster. I was running away from home 2 years ago. Angry at my pa. Thought I'd make it on my own. I was stealing food from your smokehouse when she caught me." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He remembered food going missing but had blamed it on wildlife. "She could have told you," William continued. "Should have, probably. Instead, she brought me food every day for a week. Talked to me, asked me why I was so angry. Made me see that running away wasn't fixing anything. She saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. I went home, made peace with my pa. I'm working our farm now, got a wife and baby on the way. All because a 7-year-old girl decided to help instead of tell." The cemetery fell silent, except for the wind rustling through the cottonwoods. Nathaniel looked at these men, strangers bound together by nothing more than his daughter's kindness. He thought about Emma, how she'd always seen the best in people, how she'd driven him half crazy with her soft heart and open hands. "She got that from her mother," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Margaret made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "No," she said. "She got it from both of us. We forgot, somewhere along the way. Got so focused on surviving, we forgot about living." Friedrich stepped forward again. "Mr. Hutchinson, we're not asking you to take the money for yourself, but Emma believed in helping others. Maybe that doesn't have to end today." Nathaniel looked at the fresh mound of earth, at the simple wooden cross marking his daughter's grave. He thought about all the times he'd told Emma to be careful, not to trust so easily, to think of her own family first. She'd always nodded solemnly, then gone right back to helping anyone who needed it. It had frustrated him then. Now, "A school," he said slowly. "She always wanted to go to a real school, learn to read better, maybe teach others. The Hartley place is abandoned, Margaret added, her voice stronger now. It's central to the valley, has a good well, could be fixed up. One of the men, a carpenter by the look of his hands, spoke up. I could help with that. Got some time before winter sets in proper. I know a teacher, another added. Young woman from back east, looking for a position. My family could provide desks, Carlos offered. My brother-in-law is a furniture maker. As they talked, planning began to take shape. Not just a school, but a community effort. A place where children could learn, where families could gather, where the kind of random kindness Emma had practiced could be taught and celebrated. Nathaniel found himself drawn into the discussion despite his grief. These strangers were offering more than money. They were offering to help build something lasting from his daughter's memory. It was Margaret who voiced what he was thinking. Emma would have loved this, she said softly. A school born from kindness to strangers. The sun was climbing higher now, warming the cemetery. The 10 men worked with the Hutchinson family for another hour, making concrete plans. Friedrich would manage the funds. The carpenter, Joseph his name was, would assess the building. Carlos would coordinate supplies. They would meet again in a week to begin work. As the strangers prepared to leave, each one stopped at Emma's grave. Some left flowers they'd brought. Others simply stood in silent prayer. William, the young man who'd been caught stealing, knelt and placed something small on the fresh earth. A carved wooden horse, delicate and beautiful. I made it for my daughter, he said to Nathaniel, but I think Emma should have it. She gave me my life back. Least I can do is give her something in return. After they'd gone, the Hutchinson family stood alone again by the grave, but something had changed. The crushing weight of grief was still there, but alongside it was something else, a spark of purpose, of possibility. We should go home, Margaret said eventually. The animals need tending. Nathaniel nodded but didn't move. Do you think she knew, he asked, that all those small kindnesses would come to this? No, Margaret said. She just saw people who needed help and helped them. She didn't do it for any reward. That's what makes it matter, Thomas said suddenly. He was 12, old enough to understand loss but young enough to still see clearly. She was just good because she was good, and now all those people want to be good too. From the mouths of babes, Nathaniel thought. He gathered his family, took one last look at the small grave with its growing collection of tributes. Come on, he said, we've got work to do. The school opened 3 months later, on what would have been Emma's 10th birthday. They called it the Emma Hutchinson School for Learning and Kindness. Margaret had insisted on the last part. 23 children attended that first day, from families all across the valley. The teacher, Miss Catherine Walsh, was young but dedicated, drawn by the story of how the school had come to be. The 10 strangers who'd appeared at Emma's funeral became regular fixtures in the valley. They'd formed an unofficial board for the school, meeting monthly to ensure it had what it needed. But more than that, they'd become friends to the Hutchinson family. Friedrich taught Nathaniel's son Thomas carpentry. Carlos's wife helped Margaret start a garden at the school. William brought his new daughter to visit, telling her stories of the brave girl the school was named for. The school became more than just a place of learning. It became a community center where families gathered, where problems were solved collectively, where the practice of helping strangers was taught alongside reading and arithmetic. Children were encouraged to do one kind act each week and share it with the class. The Emma Acts, they called them. A year after the school opened, a traveling photographer came through the valley. He took a picture of the entire student body standing in front of the building, with the Hutchinson family and the 10 strangers arranged behind them. In the center of the photo, they'd placed a portrait of Emma that Margaret had treasured, the only image they had of her. When the photographer asked about the story behind the school, Nathaniel found he could tell it without his voice breaking. How his daughter's death had seemed like an ending, but had become a beginning. How strangers had appeared at the worst moment of his life, and showed him that grief shared could become hope multiplied. She was just one little girl, Nathaniel told the photographer, but she planted seeds of kindness everywhere she went. We're just tending the garden she started. The scarlet fever never returned to Cedar Falls Valley. Some credited the new doctor the community had hired with the school funds. Others pointed to the improved nutrition and hygiene practices Miss Walsh taught. But Nathaniel privately believed it was something else, that when a community came together in kindness, it became stronger than any disease. He still visited Emma's grave regularly, though it looked different now. The simple wooden cross had been replaced with a proper headstone, paid for by the community. But more striking were the surroundings. Where once there had been only prairie grass, there was now a garden. Each family touched by the school had planted something: flowers, herbs, even a small apple tree. It had become a place of life rather than just death. On this particular evening, the 3rd anniversary of Emma's passing, Nathaniel sat by the grave as the sun set. Margaret was at the school, helping prepare for the harvest festival. Thomas was apprenticing with Friedrich. Sarah was practicing her letters, determined to be the best student in Miss Walsh's class. "You did this," Nathaniel said quietly to the stone. "I don't know how, but you did. You took 10 strangers and made them family. You took a valley full of isolated farms and made it a community. You took parents who'd forgotten how to hope and reminded them why we're here." The wind stirred the flowers, and for a moment Nathaniel could almost hear his daughter's laugh. Not a ghostly sound, but an echo carried in the voices of children playing at the school, in the greeting called between neighbors who'd learned to see each other, in the simple acts of kindness that had become commonplace in the valley. He thought about transformation, about how the worst loss of his life had led to the greatest growth. Not a growth that replaced Emma. Nothing could do that. But a growth that honored her, that took her way of being in the world and multiplied it beyond what one small girl could have achieved alone. The 10 strangers had arrived at Emma's funeral, bearing grief and gratitude. They'd left as the founders of a legacy. And in the process, they'd taught Nathaniel the truth his daughter had always known, that kindness was not a finite resource to be hoarded, but an infinite one that grew with sharing. As full darkness fell, Nathaniel stood to leave. Tomorrow there would be work, always work on a ranch, but there would also be purpose beyond mere survival. There would be children learning to read with books bought by strangers' donations. There would be families sharing meals made from communal gardens. There would be small acts of kindness rippling outward, like stones thrown in still water. "Thank you, little one," he whispered to the grave, "for teaching us that even in ending there can be beginning, that even in loss there can be finding, that even in death love lives on in every kindness done in your name." He walked home through the valley that had been transformed by a 9-year-old girl who'd refused to pass by suffering. The lights of the school glowed in the distance, beacon of hope born from tragedy, and Nathaniel knew with a certainty that warmed him against the cool night air that Emma's story wasn't ending. It was just beginning, written new each day in the lives of those who'd learned that helping strangers was just another way of saying family. The Emma Hutchinson School for Learning and Kindness still stands today, though the building has been rebuilt twice and the valley has grown into a proper town. The 10 strangers' descendants still serve on the board, and every child who attends learns the story of the little girl who couldn't pass by someone in need. They learn that kindness is a choice, that strangers are just friends we haven't met yet, and that the greatest transformations often come from the deepest losses. And in the cemetery on the hill, where wildflowers grow in careful abundance, a simple stone bears witness to a truth as old as humanity and as fresh as each new day. Emma Hutchinson, beloved daughter, teacher to all. Her kindness lives on in every helping hand. It's a fitting epitaph for a child who proved that death has no dominion over love, and that the seeds of compassion, once planted, can bloom across generations. The 10 strangers who arrived at her funeral, seeking to give comfort, left having received purpose, and a grieving rancher who thought his world had ended discovered it had actually just begun to expand in ways he'd never imagined possible. This is how the world changes, not through grand gestures or mighty deeds, but through children who share their lunch with strangers and communities that choose to make kindness their cornerstone. Emma Hutchinson lived only 9 years, but her legacy stretches forward into forever, proof that the smallest acts of love can move mountains and build bridges across the darkest valleys of human experience.